October 21st, 1879. Thomas Edison stands in his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, holding a light bulb. It glows. Finally, after thousands of failed attempts, it glows. The bulb burns for 13.5 hours before the filament disintegrates. Newspapers around the world announce the miracle. Edison invents the light bulb. His name becomes synonymous with innovation, with genius, with light itself. Thomas Edison, the man who illuminated the world. Except that's not what happened. Edison's 1879 light bulb was impressive, yes, but it was practically useless. 13.5 hours. That's how long it lasted. Then you'd need a new one. The filament was made of carbonized cotton thread, fragile, expensive, inconsistent. Some bulbs lasted hours, some lasted minutes. You never knew. And the cost? Astronomical. Only the wealthy could afford Edison's light. For the average person, gas lamps were cheaper, more reliable, and longer lasting. Edison's bulb was a laboratory curiosity, not a commercial product. It would take another inventor to make the light bulb actually work, to create a filament that lasted not hours, but thousands of hours, to make electric light affordable, reliable, and practical, to turn Edison's prototype into the technology that changed the world. That inventor was Lewis Howard Latimer, a black man, the son of escaped slaves, a self-taught engineer who had no formal education past age 10. Lewis didn't just improve Edison's design, he revolutionized it. He invented the carbon filament that made light bulbs last. He wrote the first book on electric lighting systems. He designed entire city lighting networks. He held patents that were essential to the entire electrical industry. And Thomas Edison hired him, kept him close, used his genius, but never gave him credit. When Edison's name went into the history books as the inventor of the light bulb, Lewis Latimer's name was erased. Quietly, completely. Today, every child learns about Thomas Edison. His face is on posters in classrooms. His story is in every textbook. Ask those same children about Lewis Latimer, and you'll get blank stares. But here's the truth. Without Lewis Latimer, Edison's light bulb would have been a footnote, a failed experiment. Lewis Latimer made electric light possible, and history forgot his name. But to understand how this happened, we need to go back to the beginning. To Boston, 1848. To a boy born into freedom that had to be fought for every single day. Lewis Howard Latimer was born on September 4, 1848, in Chelsea, Massachusetts. His parents, George and Rebecca Latimer, were fugitive slaves. They had escaped from Virginia in 1842, fleeing to Boston where slavery was illegal. But the Fugitive Slave Act meant they could be captured and returned at any time. In 1842, when Lewis was not yet born, slave catchers found his father, George. They arrested him, threw him in jail, prepared to ship him back to Virginia to be enslaved again. But Boston's abolitionist community fought back. They raised money. They protested. Frederick Douglass himself wrote articles demanding George's freedom. Finally, they purchased George's freedom for $400. $400, that's what it cost to buy Lewis's father's humanity. George was free, legally, but the trauma never left. The family lived in poverty. George worked odd jobs, barber, paper hanger, anything, but he struggled. The weight of what had been done to him, what could still be done to his children, crushed him. When Lewis was 10 years old, his father disappeared, just left, walked away from the family. Some say he couldn't handle the pressure. Some say he feared being captured again. Lewis never saw his father again. Suddenly, Lewis's mother, Rebecca, was alone with 4 children and no income. Lewis, at age 10, had to leave school. He had to work. He sold newspapers. He did odd jobs. Whatever a child could do to bring in pennies. That was the end of his formal education, 4th grade. Everything Lewis Latimer learned after that, he taught himself. At age 16, in 1864, the Civil War was raging. Lewis lied about his age and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He served on the USS Massasoit, a gunboat patrolling the coast. He was a landsman, the lowest rank. He did menial labor, cleaned, followed orders, but he learned. He learned about mechanics, about engineering, about how systems worked. When the war ended in 1865, Lewis returned to Boston. He was 17 years old, a veteran, and he needed a job. He found work as an office boy at Crosby & Gould, a patent law firm. His job was simple: run errands, clean, file papers. He made $3 per week. But Lewis didn't stay an office boy. The firm had a drafting department. Patent lawyers needed technical drawings, detailed, precise illustrations of inventions. Draftsmen were highly skilled, highly paid. Lewis watched them work. He bought a used set of drafting tools for $3, a full week's salary. At night, he practiced. He taught himself mechanical drawing, perspective, technical illustration. He studied books from the library. He copied drawings over and over until his lines were perfect. After months of practice, he approached his bosses. He showed them his drawings. They were stunned. A black office boy with a fourth-grade education had taught himself a skill that usually required years of apprenticeship. They promoted him. Lewis Howard Latimer became a draftsman. By age 20, he was chief draftsman, the best in the firm. In 1876, a man walked into the Crosby & Gould office with an invention. He needed patent drawings done quickly, very quickly. He was racing to file before a competitor. The man's name was Alexander Graham Bell. The invention was the telephone. Lewis worked through the night. He created the precise technical drawings required for Bell's patent application. Perfect perspective. Every detail exact. Those drawings were filed on February 14, 1876. Hours later, another inventor, Elisha Gray, filed a similar patent for a telephone. Bell won the patent race by hours, and Lewis Latimer's drawings were part of the official patent that changed communication forever. Bell became a legend, a household name. Lewis got his draftsman fee and went back to work. But Lewis wasn't content to just draw other people's inventions. He wanted to invent. In 1874, he developed an improved railroad car bathroom. He patented it. It was used for decades. In 1876, he invented an early air conditioning system, a method for cooling rooms using evaporative cooling. But his real breakthrough came in 1879, the same year Edison demonstrated his light bulb. Lewis saw the potential. Electric light could change everything. But he also saw the problems. Edison wasn't the only one working on electric light. There was fierce competition. Hiram Maxim, backed by the United States Electric Lighting Company, was developing a rival system. In 1880, Maxim hired Lewis Latimer as a draftsman and researcher. This was extraordinary, a black engineer hired by a major corporation, almost unheard of. But Maxim recognized genius when he saw it, and he needed Lewis. Lewis didn't just draft, he invented. He saw the core problem with electric bulbs, the filament. Edison was using carbonized cotton thread. It worked briefly, but it was inconsistent. Other inventors tried platinum, bamboo, paper. Everything burned out too quickly or cost too much. Lewis started experimenting with carbon filaments, but he approached it differently. He developed a method for creating carbon filaments that were uniform, durable, and long-lasting. He didn't just carbonize organic material randomly. He engineered the process. He shaped the filament precisely. He controlled the carbonization temperature. He encased the filament in cardboard to prevent breakage during production. In 1881, Lewis was granted a patent, Process of Manufacturing Carbons. It was revolutionary. His carbon filaments lasted hundreds of hours longer than Edison's. They were cheaper to produce, more consistent. Suddenly, electric light was practical. Maxim's company started manufacturing bulbs using Lewis's process. They worked reliably, but Lewis didn't stop there. Installing light bulbs was one thing. Installing entire electrical systems for cities was another. Someone needed to design the systems, plan the wiring, train the workers, oversee installation. Lewis did all of it. In 1881 and 1882, he traveled to Montreal, then to London, overseeing the installation of entire city lighting systems. He designed the layouts. He supervised the work. He trained local workers, many of whom had never seen electric light. In London, he set up one of the first large-scale electric streetlight systems in the world. A black American engineer, in London, installing the future. He wrote detailed technical manuals. He solved problems on the fly. He made electric light work not just in a lab, but in the real world. And then, in 1890, Thomas Edison hired him. By 1890, the war of the currents was raging. Edison's direct current system versus Westinghouse's alternating current, patent battles everywhere, lawsuits, corporate espionage. Edison needed experts, people who understood the technology deeply, people who could testify in court, write technical documents, defend patents. He hired Louis Latimer. Louis became a key member of Edison's legal team. He investigated patent claims. He testified as an expert witness in court cases. He was one of the Edison pioneers, a group of elite engineers who had contributed to the electrical industry. Louis worked for Edison for years, loyal, brilliant, essential. But here's what Edison never did: give Louis public credit. Edison's name was on everything, every light bulb, every patent portfolio, every newspaper article. Louis's name appeared in legal documents, in patent filings, in technical reports that the public never saw. Edison praised Louis privately, called him invaluable. But publicly? Silence. When journalists asked Edison about his team, he'd mention white engineers, never Louis. When Edison wrote his autobiography, he mentioned dozens of contributors. Louis wasn't among them. When histories of the electric light were written, Edison was the lone genius, the inventor who conquered darkness. Louis Latimer, the man who made it actually work, was invisible. In 1911, a group photograph was taken of the Edison pioneers, 28 men, who had been essential to the development of electric light and power. Louis Latimer is in that photograph, the only black man. He stands in the back row, serious expression, dignified. That photograph is in the Smithsonian now. If you read the caption, it lists some of the names. Louis Latimer is not mentioned. Even in the photograph meant to honor the pioneers, his name was erased. Louis Howard Latimer worked into his 70s. He taught mechanical drawing to immigrants at the Henry Street settlement. He wrote poetry. He painted. He was a Renaissance man, brilliant, kind, generous with his knowledge. He died on December 11, 1928, at age 80. His obituary in the New York Times was 4 sentences. It mentioned that he worked with Edison and held several patents. That was it. 4 sentences. The man who made electric light practical. Who designed city lighting systems. Who held essential patents. 4 sentences. Meanwhile, Thomas Edison, who had died in 1931, received a state funeral. Thousands attended. President Hoover gave a eulogy. Edison's death was marked by a symbolic dimming of lights across America. For 1 minute, the nation went dark to honor the man who brought light. No lights were dimmed for Louis Latimer. Let's talk about what Louis Latimer actually invented. His carbon filament process wasn't a minor improvement. It was the breakthrough that made electric light commercially viable. Edison's early bulbs lasted 40 hours. Expensive, impractical. Louis's improved filament design lasted over 1,000 hours. Some lasted much longer. That's the difference between a curiosity and a revolution. By 1885, light bulbs using Latimer-style carbon filaments were being mass-produced. Prices dropped. Reliability increased. Within a decade, electric light went from a luxury for the rich to a standard feature in middle-class homes. That was Louis's doing. He also wrote the first comprehensive book on electric lighting, Incandescent Electric Lighting, a practical description of the Edison system. Published in 1890, it was the definitive technical manual. Engineers and electricians used it for decades. Louis explained the science, the installation, the safety procedures, everything. He made electric light understandable, teachable, scalable. And his work wasn't limited to light bulbs. He held patents for railway car bathrooms that improved sanitation for millions of train passengers. He invented an early version of the fire escape ladder. He contributed to early telephone technology. He was a true polymath. and history reduced him to a footnote. Here's the financial reality. Thomas Edison's companies, General Electric and others descended from his work, are worth hundreds of billions of dollars today. GE alone, at its peak, was worth over $600 billion. The global lighting industry, over $150 billion annually. Every LED bulb, every streetlight, every lamp, all descended from the technology Lewis Latimer helped perfect. He received a salary, a decent one for a black man in that era, but still just a salary. No royalties, no ownership stake, no share of the billions generated. When he died in 1928, his estate was modest, comfortable, but nothing compared to what his contributions were worth. Edison died wealthy, a legend, an icon. Lewis died respected by those who knew him, forgotten by everyone else. For decades after his death, Lewis Latimer was almost completely erased from history. Textbooks mentioned Edison, they mentioned Tesla, sometimes Westinghouse, never Latimer. In the 1960s and 70s, during the civil rights movement, historians started recovering lost black history. They found Lewis Latimer, they found his patents, his drawings, his book, the photograph of the Edison pioneers. They found a genius who had been deliberately hidden. In 1968, Lewis Latimer was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, 40 years after his death. In 1988, his former home in Flushing, New York, was turned into a museum, the Lewis H. Latimer House Museum. It's small, underfunded. Most people don't know it exists. In 2006, the MIT Black History Project created educational materials about Lewis Latimer. In 2014, a documentary called The Black Edison told his story. But ask a random person on the street who invented the light bulb, and they'll say Edison. Ask who made the light bulb actually work, and they'll look at you confused. Lewis Latimer should be as famous as Thomas Edison. His contributions were as essential, his genius as profound. But he's not famous, because history is written by the powerful, and the powerful decide whose names get remembered. Edison had wealth, had whiteness, had PR machines working to mythologize him. Lewis had brilliance, had integrity, had a skin color that made him invisible to the people writing the textbooks. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. Every history book that mentions Edison but not Latimer is making a choice. Every classroom poster showing Edison's face but not Latimer's is making a choice. Every documentary about the genius of Edison that doesn't mention the black engineer who made his bulbs work is making a choice. And those choices add up to erasure. Here's what hurts the most. Lewis never got bitter. In his writings, his letters, his poetry, there's no anger at Edison, no resentment. He was proud of his work. He knew what he'd accomplished, but he also understood the world he lived in. He understood that as a black man, no matter how brilliant, he would never receive the recognition he deserved. So he didn't fight for fame. He fought to do good work, to help people, to teach the next generation. In his later years, he taught mechanical drawing to immigrants at the Henry Street settlement in New York. He didn't have to. He was retired. He could have rested. But he spent hours teaching young people, many of them poor, many of them marginalized, the skills that had changed his life. He gave them the gift he'd given himself, knowledge. That's who Lewis Latimer was, not bitter, not angry, just generous. And the world thanked him by forgetting his name. This is still happening. In 2014, 3 researchers developed the blue LED, a breakthrough that made modern LED lighting possible. They won the Nobel Prize. One of them, Shuji Nakamura, fought for years to get credit and compensation from his employer, who tried to take all the credit. In 2020, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, a black woman scientist, was the lead researcher developing the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. When the vaccine was announced, photos showed white male executives. Dr. Corbett was barely mentioned. It took months of public pressure before she received appropriate recognition. In 2023, AI language models like GPT were making billions for companies. The researchers who developed the underlying transformer architecture, many of them women, many people of color, are unknown to the public. The pattern continues. Brilliant people from marginalized communities do the work. Powerful people take the credit. Lewis Latimer's story isn't history. It's present tense. Every light bulb you turn on exists because of Lewis Latimer, the carbon filament technology he developed, the installation systems he designed, the book he wrote that taught a generation of electricians, every lit street, every illuminated room, every glowing screen. His genius made it possible, and most people will never know his name, but you know it now. Lewis Howard Latimer. Born 1848, son of escaped slaves, self-taught engineer with a fourth-grade education, invented the carbon filament process that made light bulbs practical, designed citywide electrical systems across 2 continents, wrote the definitive book on electric lighting, held essential patents in lighting, telephony and sanitation, worked alongside Edison, Bell and Maxim, made the modern world possible. Died 1928, barely remembered. Every time you flip a light switch, remember his name. Not because it makes you feel good, but because he earned it, because his genius deserves to be spoken, because erasure only works if we let it. Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb, he invented a prototype. Lewis Latimer made it work. Remember his name, Lewis Howard Latimer, the man who actually illuminated the world and got erased from the story. Remember his name.